But essentially, the Willow chip is used to make huge calculations and to answer huge computational equations. Sometimes we're trying to figure out things and we don't have enough time to go through the processes to do so. So this chip is supposed to greatly drop the entropy, drop the time down in coming up with particular answers. And essentially, one of the best ways to utilize this chip as their advertising is through cryptography, breaking cryptic algorithms and codes and passwords, so forth and so on. So when we're looking at the government and how the government has things encrypted, how we look at other governments, people that two countries they're about to be at war with one another. If we look at the past wars, and we look at, a lot of films, I know Benedict Cumberbatch came up in a movie called the Imitation Game, in that film where they was developing a computer to crack the code of a specific type of codex that the Germans were using. And they were like, if we can figure out their code, if we could crack this code, then we can read, and we can listen in on all of the communication that they're having and know what they're going to do so we could win this war. So that ain't stopped. It's still wars, and intel is supreme. So if I can crack through your privacy and essentially dig into your soul and know what you're thinking and what's on your mind, then I know what you're going to do before you do it. And I can essentially put you in this bubble that you don't even know you're in.
Come on now. Casey, from reading this about this Willow chip, in its very first paragraph, it breaks down our new chip demonstrates error correction and performance that paves the way to a useful large-scale quantum computer. Error correction, man.
Yes.
Break that down for us. What exactly does that mean?
So when you're thinking about computers and how they operate, as a computer becomes more complex, a traditional computer that you and I know, as it becomes more complex and intricate, trying to, mirror the human brain, what essentially happens is it starts increasing in errors. So you have algorithms, which are essentially equations and code that create a shortcut so a computer knows what tasks to follow and how to get to a certain destination. But the more and more complex you make it, the more errors, and the errors are exponential. And exponential meaning cubed and squared, like, as it gets this amount of memory, just as much as amount of memory it gets, it'll get this amount of errors. So it almost becomes pointless to create such a supercomputer, because once you get to this vastness of computational potential, you also have all this room for error. So you don't know if the answer you're going to receive is really going to be what you want it to be, or just not what you want it to be, just truth, right? Just truth. We'll keep it that simple. So that's essentially what the regular computers do, and that's the problem that a lot of the scientists face. So the name of that term is error correction. So in quantum computing, the exponential error rate was just astronomical. So as they built more and more qubits for this computer, or for this chip, so to speak, the error rate would just be off the charts. Now, with the Willow, they figured out how to keep the errors low. They kept it beneath the threshold. And with doing that, that means that now they can increase the size of their chip, and increasing the size of their chip and their processing power, they don't have to worry about the errors taking place. Yes.
KT, speaking about errors, right? Earlier, when we first started off, you talked about Capricorn having to learn from previous mistakes. Mm-hmm. Do you think it's somewhat unnatural for Google to try to take away errors and to then have error correction opposed to trying to learn naturally from the universe.
Right. So the whole reason why it seems as though they're going against nature is because they are. And a company like that is not going to be in alignment with nature, because nature you cannot patent, nature you cannot pimp, nature you cannot own. But to create some type of synthetic reflection or something synthetically parallel to nature, now what you can do is you can say you own it, you can facilitate it, you could dictate who can use it and who cannot use it. So on the most simple level, that's what it is. But in order to understand how nature operates, you actually have to go through nature to do it. And they do that error correction naturally, but they do it through us, because a lot of the understandings of artificial intelligence is based on our particular data points that we use on social media, that we use with our credit cards, that we use with finance, that we use with podcasts, that we use in our conversations and our voicemails and the movies we go to and the plays we go to and the trips we go on and the comments we make and the arguments and how we respond to celebrities dying and people dying and new births in the world. Like, all of that is info. Right. And artwork and different people's creativity. All of these things are kind of amalgamated and consolidated into code. And that's utilized to feed into the system. So they use us as the error correction. And in addition to that, they also what separates this particular matter, why Willow was able to be successful, is because they used Masonic mathematics and order in order to, right? They used the 357. So they were able to create a qubit 3 by 3, 5 by 5, 7 by 7. So before I go into 357, let me give the people a kind of understanding of, what quantum even is, because we're assuming everybody knows. Right. And there are people that have an understanding, but not everybody. But quantum mechanics essentially is the study of things on a very small level. If you've seen Ant-Man or Honey, I Shrunk the Kids, it's the study of stuff at that level. And the reason why there's a study of life and the interaction of matter at that level is because traditional physics on our scale, the size we are and the things that we can see with the naked eye, operate totally different than things that are very small on a quantum, nano, femto scale and everything. Everything getting closer and closer to that Planck length, which is the smallest measurable length by human standards. Anything that small operates totally differently. So there's a whole nother type of physics down there, and that physics is quantum mechanics. So when you quantize something, you're giving it a number. So if you see smoke, smoke is just a big mass. You could just say, no one ever says, oh, wow, look at that one smoke. Like, it's just smoke. Yeah. But the smoke is made up of particles, and it's going to move in a certain way based on how those particles interact. And there's a certain temperature in that environment that's also going to affect those particles and how it interacts, which affects the overall cloud of smoke. So quantum and quantize is you pretty much being able to account for all of those molecules and parts that makes up the cloud, and then being able to predict how the cloud is going to move based on certain factors, right? So, and that comes in handy when you're dealing with things that you can't even see with your own eyes, right? To quantize it, you give it numbers, you give it kind of form and shape, and then you can start to predict how things interact. Now, going from quantum mechanics to quantum computation or quantum computers is that now you're taking a typical computer and now you're applying quantum practices to it. So a regular computer is based off of really our ancient technology, You know, you go back to Africa, you go back here in the Americas, you go anywhere in the world of the ancients, and we have binary code, which is the 1 and the 0. And I like speaking about the Congo cross, Congo cosmology, because you have the principles of Kala and Zima. And Kala represents a fire, a flame. You light a match, you light a lighter, you turn on your stove. All of those are examples of you going from one state to now there's life, now there's existence, now there's some type of flaming interaction. There's heat, there's thermodynamics. That's the 1. That's the excited state. Then you have Zima, the 0, which is the extinguished state. You put the fire out. Yeah, the campfire, you threw water on it, you smother it with dirt. The fire is out. There's some smoke kind of rising as it's the residual of the fire that was. And that is the 0. That is no life. Life was extinguished. It is gone. So one's life and one's death. That is 1 and 0. That's how computers work. And it's essentially the computer being able to recognize where life exists versus where life don't exist in the computer at any given time. So you have a 1 and a 0. You got 4. You really have 2 possible things, but then 4 groups of that. So you can have a 1, 1. You can have a 0, 0. You can have a 1, 0. You can have a 0, 1. These are all codes, and then codes grow from that. So it's similar to heads and tails. So when you have a coin, you have heads or tails. That's another way of saying Kala or Zima, right? You have a 0, 1, and you have an on or off. And with calculations, with answers are either going to be heads or their tails. If we are trying to figure something out, flip the coin in the air and it falls, it's going to land on something that is going to dictate whether it's on or it's off, whether it's heads or it's tails. Now, quantum computers add another concept, which is called superposition, which is like saying Kali-Zima or Kala-Zima, meaning that now you have the 1 and the 0 simultaneously. We saw an example of this in Avengers Infinity War with Doctor Strange. They was on Titan, Saturn. There we go, Saturn again, right? And he was freaking out over there, and Iron Man was trying to find out what was going on, and he came back too, and he said he went through different timelines to see which particular timeline they would be successful in defeating Thanos. So instead of a classical computer, which the Avengers would have had to fight through 14,605,000, because that's how many different timelines Doctor Strange went through in that moment he was doing his meditation. That would be equivalent to the Avengers fighting 14,605,000 different scenarios, different fights, one after the other in sequential order, right? Boom, boom, boom. That would have took forever. Nobody would have known. Doctor Strange wouldn't have known. So what Doctor Strange did is he looked at all 14,605,000 at the same time. That's the difference between a traditional computer and a quantum computer, is that the quantum computer is able to look through all probabilities simultaneously, find the best one, and that's the answer, as opposed to a computer going through them one by one. And one of the best ways to understand this is if you take a coin and you stand it up on a surface and you let the coin spin, because while it spins, it is both heads and tails until it falls on heads. So heads is on, tails is off, superposition. is it's spinning. It is in all states simultaneously. So now when you have that aspect added on to the 1 and the 0, this opens, instead of having 2 options of 1 and 0, you now have 4 different states. And now as you increase the amount of qubits, which are the quantum versions of bits, they exponentially increase, giving you way more processing power, way more probabilities, way more options than if you're just dealing with the 1 and the 0. And this is what Willow achieved by utilizing 357. They were able to decrease error correction and essentially be able to do a very specific and complex computational task that would normally take a supercomputer 10 septillion years, 10 with 25 zeros after it. That's how many years it would have took in order for a classical computer to come to this answer. Yet the quantum computer was able to do it in 5 minutes.